is we are switching gears completely. And for the rest of this chapter, AMP 1.5 and 1.6, essentially it is making sure that we are speaking the same language in regards to the body. So that way from now on, when we start talking about things, we're all speaking it from the same perspective. So it's kind of like a Spanish 101 class to make sure that we are all using the same foundational nouns, terms, directions. So anatomical position is going to be our standard reference point. So our standard reference point. If you ever look at a map, you know that north has to be pointing north for the whole map to make sense. So this is the same way. When we're talking about the body, we need to make sure that we're looking at the body the same way. So the standard anatomical position is listed here. It is upright. It is going to be this, my stick figure. I apologize, y'all. Art is not my forte. And sometimes you just got to do with stick figures. So standard anatomical position. You are upright, hands and shoulders in alignment, legs straight, feet pointing forward. So toes are pointing forward, legs are straight, hips are square, shoulders are square, faces forward. The difference is your hands will be, this part will be your pinky, and then inside will be your, the outside will be your thumb, and the inside will be your pinky. So with what you are doing here, if you were to stand in a very natural, relaxed position, your hands or your arm would fall like this, and essentially you would just be seeing the side of your hand with your finger sticking out. That was a very bad drawing, so we're just going to erase that. But with anatomical position, you are standing with your palm out. So your arm will actually look one like this. So if this is going to be the middle of my body, my palm is out, I would stand up and actually do that. That means if this is my body right here, this part is going to be my pinky, and this part is my thumb. This position also applies if you are lying supine, which would be where your toes are pointing forward, your hands would be by your side, and you would be laying like this. Palms would be facing up. So that's the only difference with normal, relaxed, just standing position. So then we're going to also talk about some directional terms. And these directional terms are to make sure that we can describe body structures in relationship to another one. This is essentially reading a map. So we're going to go through these real quick on my non-stick drawings. So one thing I do want to give you a heads up on is as you're talking about speaking directional terms, as a reminder, we're learning how things relate to each other. Think about a map. If you have north, the opposite direction of north is south. If you have east, the opposite direction is west. So these anatomical terms actually are going to have opposite directions. So that's very important to note. So this first two go together. So you're going to have your cranial, otherwise known as superior. So essentially that is going to be toward the head. You're going up toward the head. The opposite of that is inferior, also called caudal, and that would be going down or below. So you can say that the head is superior, because it's up here, to the abdomen. The head is more up, whereas the feet are inferior to the head because they are more down. That makes sense? Another two that go together are going to be anterior and posterior. These are also called ventral and dorsal. So these two go together, anterior and posterior. So this is going to be anterior is toward the front of the body. Posterior or dorsal is towards the back. So another way to think about this, anterior is going to be belly side, posterior or dorsal is going to be back side. So your nose is anterior to the back of your head. So it's more on the front side. Another set that go together are going to be medial and lateral. And this is going to be looking if you split the body directly down the middle. If you were to drop a plumb line directly down the body, medial is going to be toward that middle section. You're going in to the body. Lateral, you are not going, you are going the opposite direction. You're going away from that. You are going out or away from the middle. So this is if you drop something directly down the middle. So an example of this would be my nose, which would be right on the midline, is medial compared to my fingers, which are farther away. You can kind of see how that works. Another example is intermediate. We don't use that one a whole lot, so there's not going to be a lot of terms where that's used, but that's going to be the structures that are kind of in the middle, and it's a little bit more unclear about what's going on. Okay, there's a couple other structures that you need to know. These two go together, proximal and distal. So proximal is going to be anything that is near. Distal is going to be anything that's far. So if you, these are very bad examples, so I don't really like these guys, but if I were to draw a little stick figure right here, and I were to draw them with my hands out, again, I'm not an artist, y'all. When you look at this guy, essentially what you're saying is, if you were to look at your elbow right here, your hand is proximal to your elbow. Your hand is near. Your foot is far. So your foot is distal from your elbow. So it is farther away. They're very interesting, but as you go, you'll kind of understand how those two work. And then the last two are going to be superficial and deep. And these are referring to internal and external. So superficial, I like to pull out the great 2000s movie of Mean Girls, and we've got the plastics. They were all about the external. They were superficial. So with the superficial, it is going to be toward the surface. So your skin is superficial. Deep is going to be things that are more internal. This is going to be your bones are deep, whereas your skin is superficial. So we're doing a 3D direction inside the body. Okay, another kind of directional term is kind of just talking about the division of the body. So we have North and South America. When you look at a map, you're going to have axial and appendicular parts of the body. So it's just like thinking through a map. We're all speaking the same language, but we're going to talk about the regional divisions of the body. But I'm going to move that guy back in place first. Okay, so the two major divisions of the body are going to be axial and appendicular. Essentially, this is North and South America. Axial is going to be anything that is going to be on the midline. So that will be your head, your neck, and your trunk. Axial. Whereas appendicular is going to be anything that is attached. So that will be your arms and your legs. That's appendicular. So it's essentially what's on the midline is axial, what's attached to it is appendicular. We talk about this mainly when we start talking about the skeleton system, and we're going to do the skeletal system by axial versus appendicular. Okay, I'm not going to go through these guys in detail, but you need to go through and review all of these. So this is essentially what I was saying when we're all learning how to speak Spanish, is we're all learning to speak the same language about the human body. So this is going to be the front right here. This is going to be the back. And these are all terms. From now on, we're going to use these terms or these nouns when we are talking about the actual anatomy itself. So for example, when we start talking about the neck, we're going to call it the cervical region. So if I throw out the cervical region, you need to remember that the term I am using is the anatomical term, so you need to have these memorized. Also, keep in mind that the human body is a three-dimensional object. So yes, we have the cervical on the back, but we also have cervical on the front because you are a 3D object. So just keep in mind, these are honestly super explanatory. Some of them you already know, like the abdominal region is called umbilical. You know, that makes sense. Some of them you might not know. So just, you are responsible for knowing those. That's going to be on your own terms, but it's just the front and the back. Okay, the last thing that I'm going to cover is going to be the body planes. So when we're doing the body planes, what we are looking at is if we were to take our body that looks like this, how are we actually viewing our body and how are we able to perceive it? So this is going to be body planes if we cut the body into sections. So this would be like saying we've got North America, South America. We've talked about axial and epidicular. This is like taking North America and doing Canada versus the East Coast versus the West Coast, where we're taking the body planes and cutting it up into sections. So these are the ones that you are going to need to know. And this is where you need to kind of just a visual, that's going to be the best one to kind of see. So the first body plane is going to be the sagittal. And the sagittal will split the body into right and left parts. So that means if we take my little stick figure dude here, you are chopping him right here. And if you chop him right here, you are going to have a right side and you are going to have a left side. So you've cut him in half. If you do it right down the middle, where he has an eye on either side and he is perfectly symmetrical, you have done the mid-sagittal. So with the sagittal plane, that is going to be this guy right here. You are cutting it essentially down the middle of the body, in between your eyes is a good way to say it. You're going to get a right and a left part. The next one is going to be the frontal. The frontal section, essentially what you're going to do is if I were to draw my little guy like this, whereas he's not facing forward, but he's facing the side, a frontal section is where you are actually chopping this way. I like to call this a headband. So if you were to put on a headband and you were essentially slicing down that headband, you are going from the top of the head down to the ears. You are slicing down the side of the body. What happens with a frontal section is you are going to get an anterior or a front and a posterior part. So you're going to get a front, anterior, and a back, a posterior section. So that's a frontal slice. That's this guy right here. And then the third one is going to be the transverse. And he's the easiest. The transverse section, so the transverse section for this, is, like I said, it's going to be the easiest. And with this one, what you're doing, here's my little guy. He's facing forward again. And with this one, you are going to slice across the body. So like a belt. So a transverse section is going to be kind of like a belt. And what you're doing with this one is you are going to have a superior and inferior part. So essentially you're going to have a superior, a top, or a bottom when you cut this in half. So the sagittal is going to split down the middle and create a right and a left. The frontal is going to split down essentially the side of the body and create a front and a back. And the transverse is going to cut down the middle of the body like a belt and create a top and a bottom. The reason these are important is within your book or your PowerPoints, you can see how these are going to be anatomical images from MRIs. This right here is from the perspective of where they have split someone down the middle, and you're actually looking, this right here is the spinal cord. This would be the front, or the, oh, so sorry. You are only looking into the right side of the body. This is the frontal section, so this is actually going to be where the head would be. This is the shoulders, and so this is the heart and the lungs. So you're looking, essentially, you've cut down like that headband and you're getting half of the torso. And then this is going to be right across, right below your stomach. So this is your backbone right here. Think about this as a tube going into the screen. And then the tips of the toes are all the way at the very, very, very bottom. So this is right underneath the stomach, right underneath your rib cage, if you were to slice your body in half right here. So you can actually use these when you're looking at imaging scans. So for this last part of the section, that was 1.5. What I want you guys to do for 1.6 is I'm going to talk through the two pieces that I really want you guys to be familiar with. So this next part of the PowerPoint will go into something called body cavities and membranes. And essentially what I want you to just be familiar with, understanding that there are going to be different parts of your body that are going to be packaged together. These are called cavities. So you can look right here. You have a dorsal body cavity, and that is essentially going to be the part of the back of the body. And there are two parts of the dorsal cavity. You will have the cranium and you will have the ventral. This is your dorsal. And then another body cavity you're going to have is the ventral. So this is the front. And you will have the abdominopelvic and the thoracic. So basically, if you look at this guy right here, he's just the best to look at. You can see that all of these are individual little sections. That is all we mean by the body cavities. So I just want you to be familiar with how the body is broken up and essentially into different, packaged into different areas. And then the last thing I want you guys to know is going to be these quadrants. So I do want you to know the abdominal quadrants. And basically all that means is if you take the human body and you're looking straight on, your belly button is about right here, you are going to have these 4 quadrants right here. And these are named for anatomical position. So keep in mind, if you were to identify your right hand is going to be a different side than the anatomical position. So the right hand on our body is going to be over here. And our left hand is going to be over here. So if you look down at figure 11.1, this is the right side of him. This is the left side. So anatomical position in human anatomy is always going to be doing it from the other person's body positioning. So it's not your right and left, it is their right and left. So these are the quadrants. There are 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. So you have the right upper quadrant and the left upper quadrant, the right lower quadrant, and the left lower quadrant. These are important because if someone comes into an ER with a gunshot wound in the left upper quadrant, you need to make sure that you are not checking out that area. So it gives you a direction of within the abdomen where you should look. It also gives you an idea of organs. However, this is still a lot of body coverings to follow. So within the ventral body cavity, it goes a step further, and it doesn't just do the quadrants, it does the regions. So these are going to be the abdominopelvic regions. I do not think I spelled that right. So what this is doing is this is taking essentially the same square footage of your body. So your belly button is right there, and it is splitting it into 9, or it is splitting it into a hashtag type symbol. So if what I want you guys to know is go through and have identify these 9 areas. It follows the same pattern with this is the right side and this is the left side of the body. But what I want you to be able to identify is you do need to know these 9. That covers lecture and lab. But what I want you guys to be able to do is identify what these are, because as you'll notice, if the body is split into these 9 sections, right here, your stomach is only going to be found in the regions that are these 2 regions up top. That's important for anything clinical. So your stomach is actually going to be up here. Your urinary bladder will be down here. That is in a different quadrant. So it helps to speak to the locations of structures because you can isolate where the actual structure are. So if you have ever had or have ever known someone who has issues with their appendix, the appendix actually is found in your right iliac region. It's right over top your right hip. It's found in your right iliac region. But most people complain about pain in their left hypochondriac or their left lumbar region. So it's actually, when you hear pain up here, a lot of times the diagnosis ends up being down here. So you can actually use these terms to describe these areas and describe location of pain as well. So that is the end of this content. Again, keep in mind, this is an overview. Please go back through and be familiar with everything, know what's going on. But I hope this gives you an idea of the overall takeaways for what is needed for the content and for this course. For lab, what you need to go through, and you do need to be able to complete these exercises through your lab manual to be able to understand and identify more of the hands-on perspective of these pieces. So those are listed on iCollege for you to go through and look at. I believe it is Activity 1, Activity 2. We are not doing Activity 3. So it's Activity 1, Activity 2, I believe it's Activity 4, and Activity 5. But 1, 2, and 4 are the primary ones for you to focus on for lab.